Issue number 981, evoking the cover of number 934, with the team taking off like Batman asked them to help him move some furniture.
Which, I'd understand. He lives in a mansion and would probably spend more time micromanaging and repeating how careful you have to be with the anti-credenza or the suits of armor in the hallways.
We begin with Batclops, who keeps saying he's really Tim to emphasize how this is really what he wants before that notion is no doubt contradicted later. As he shows Kate her future murder of Bruce, Clopsy says that he'd always wanted her as part of their mission, push her into the light, even though in nearly 50 issues we've never seen evidence of that. But the dramatic dialogue says so, believe it anyway. Spoiler alert interjects that Brother Eye and Armstrong have been playing Tim.
You mean all that stuff that Possessed Tim said was what he wanted over and over and over and over really wasn't what he wanted, like I just said seconds ago? How shocking.
Under Armstrong's orders, all the OMACs converge and take on Batman, who apologizes to Orphan for dragging her along, not wanting her to be hurt. Backing him up and defending Steph, Cassino now knows she's not destined to be bad, thanks to seeing the other timeline.
So Mr. I Write Emotional Narratives resolved the barely constructed subplot of Orphan thinking she's doomed to be terrible, not through conversation or personal trials or anything like that, but a convoluted, torturously told story where she sees Cassandra Cain, her superior iteration, in action. Wow, Tinian really outdid himself. This cheap pre-Flashpoint tease was even worse and more infuriating than I thought when I first saw previews of it a couple of years ago.
Urge to kill rising.
Steph then brings up more future data that had previously been unseen, and got it by convenience, what else? Older Bruce, wanted by the government, is meeting with older Kate, revealing that constructing the Brother Eye satellite gave him radiation poisoning and is slowly killing him. After the program's final protocol, it'll self-destruct, wipe his computers, and disable his vehicles. He figures Batman was an idea he needed, but despite how useful it's been, it holds his allies back, and he wants nothing more than his children to build their own futures.
Psst! Bruce calling his sidekicks his children is your cue to start crying.
My emotions! My emotions!
Seriously though, when Tim saw this, like when future Tim arrived at the scene, there were colony soldiers everywhere. So why aren't they there now? This should be easy stuff for editors to catch, or a writer to notice if they pay attention to the stuff they're writing.
He recorded a message to the family so they'll know Kate shooting him was not a heartless act, but what Bruce wanted. But Bro Eye deleted it because it didn't get to wage war on crime like it was promised, and manipulated future Tim for that end. This makes the OMAC shell recede from Red Robin, but he's still infected, teetering between options before him. Ulysses thinks Eye did good, since a little manipulation was the push that the greatest Robin needed to become Batman and end crime, even though none of the glimpses of the future showed crime being ended in any way. Steph, reminding how horrific the future became because he stopped processing grief, is somehow able to give control of the matter over to Tim, because regardless of what the identity is he uses, she believes in and loves him, knowing he'll make the right call, despite many of their interactions not supporting this at all. The nanoswarms leave their hosts, and the tower starts destabilizing. This is totally an appropriate time for Steph to tell Batman how powerful his symbol is, because her better version was Batgirl, so he needn't worry over whatever he was about to apologize for, and Pointy Ears leads an evacuation of the building. Tim is trying to steady its collapse so everyone can evacuate safely. Nice touch with the Brother Eye glow fading gradually from his text as he regains control. He waxes on how his desperation to avoid becoming his dark future self led to him trying anything to build a perfect crime-fighting system, only to have it used against his loved ones. He needs to let go of his dream, tears, hugs, and Kate saying they'll need to build a better now and take the future one day at a time, while Belfry 2.0 dissolves into a sky portal for some reason.
A powerful manipulative AI commanded by Armstrong is simply tamed because of free will and Steph ambiguously handing control over to Tim somehow. What's supposed to be a triumph of human spirit feels like just another shallow resolution. This is why the approach of technology is magic doesn't help.
We jump ahead 3 weeks as Bruce dines with Kate, neither one shy about mentioning bats or suits or secret teams around civilians. Ugh. Jacob regained his rank of colonel in exchange for dismantling the colony, and Kate wants to figure out how to shape her mission herself rather than by others. Luke is pausing his Batwing activities to analyze remnants of Bro-I and create preventative measures for it. Azrael wants to see things from a greater perspective, whatever that means, and talked with Cyborg, because why not? While Kate decides who she is and what she needs to be, because you can't have too many cliched platitudes, Bruce still wants to be close and promises to be there for her. After dinner, her dad calls about a possible new Religion of Crime coven, and Batwoman soon swings into action, though from this angle it looks like she's headed for the pavement on 2 separate lines. Weird. Under her own suggestion, Cassino moves into the Thompson Clinic to be a better person and be good at person things, though Leslie mentions Harper visiting during her night shifts, and absolutely nothing good can come from that. So, more lies. Until they get her enrolled in high school, she'll be tutored by Barbara Gordon.
Because Tinian likes copying things done by better writers, at the same time relying on and disregarding them because he thinks a few rhyme schemes make him a master poet.
And speaking of poems, Babs mentions Cassino as a handle on the written word, which, since when? And suggests working up to Shakespeare, of course. Then the clone recites some lines perfectly because poetry is actual magic, and magic doesn't need explaining. I don't care if the intent was for hugs and happy faces, this is still dumb. And I'm not sure why Barb is surprised. If she talked to Stephanie and got info on Cassino like she said back in Trial of the Batwoman, shouldn't she already know this is a thing? Oh, and big shocker, Basil Carlo isn't really dead. He sticks a note to the door, sneaks out, and hops in a car with Dr. October, figuring it's best to get out of Gotham. Just remember that big dramatic epic death and all the turmoil that came with it, and now...
Feels kind of pointless.
At Wayne Manor, Bruce is helping Tim pack a car as he heads off to IVU, with his mentor wishing him the best, saying everyone will be fine while he's gone, and reminding him to call Alfred. He takes off with Steph in the car, where it's revealed that he's not exactly going to be on campus. He apparently wants to devote time to investigating those divergent timelines they glimpsed, and Drake wants his lady by his side to keep him honest. Batman, posing in front of what I assume is heat lightning given the lack of clouds, has Alfred shut off a tracer on Tim's car, trusting his ward will call if necessary. Pennyworth ponders if the entire Belfry project had more of an impact than his boss lets on. Perhaps next time you'll start a school for young vigilantes. No, not yet. Yet?
How's this for a name? The Martha Wayne School for Gifted Young Face Punchers. Naturally, you'll be the entire cafeteria staff. And guidance counselor. And janitor. And...
The signal lights up in the sky, so Batman swings off, telling his butler to tell Gordon he's on his way. The entire point of the bat signal is to turn it on and Bats shows up. A middleman isn't necessary, especially when it would risk exposing his secret identity. Maybe it was the only way to work in the Dark Knight saying, "Everything's going to be all right," as the comic, the story, and this writer's run concludes.
That concludes this arduous journey through 49 issues of Detective Comics. And thankfully it's over, because this was even worse than I thought it was going to be.
Oh, it's avant-garde. It's stylized. It's bear poop.
No way, brah. The entire point of writing that fake letter was so that you'd realize that Tinian's really a good writer because...
What?
I didn't say anything about a fake letter.
You're telling me this crayon-scribbled, error-filled letter from a major publisher was a fraud?
But you don't understand. It's just that, I just wanted you to think the way I did, and...
I cannot believe this. After everything you've done, and it's still not lighting up. What's up with that?
I should really stay down. But I'm not for some reason. Bro!
Well, someone knew how to write her well once. Maybe someday, hopefully soon, they'll figure that out again.
So, we're cool, brah? You're not mad at me anymore?
Oh no, I am still absolutely furious. But I think maybe the prospect of reading this and the actual experience might have shorted this thing out or something. I don't know how it works. Maybe I just outraged myself. But you'll get your comeuppance soon enough. Don't you worry. As for the story...
First, let me get to some good points. I generally liked the art throughout the run. Sure, the sudden changes to painted aesthetics was a little odd, and there were some choices in terms of certain character expressions that were more puzzling than anything else. And there was some inconsistency sometimes, like Cassino sometimes looking older or a completely different race. But I'm amiable to most art styles. Any other criticism I would have would be that most of the art is inclined towards a more realistic representation, and that may not have been the best to represent the kind of skill set Orphan is supposed to have. Not terrible by any means, but a little too rigid to show off what, say, Cassandra Cain could really do. From time to time there was dialogue between characters that was actually kind of fun or felt genuine, like Kate and Tamara, even though their familiarity came out of left field, or Kate and her dad. As for this particular story arc, it's more of the same. There's potential, some interesting ideas, and even a few avenues to explore, but Tinian's lackadaisical effort wastes it all. Ulysses, reinvented from a militaristic prodigy to another generic teen computer super genius, commands Brother Eye, a lack of development there in its own right, and accesses certain details about the future, but Steph can somehow access more data, and after Tim asserts his will, Eye just goes away.
I mean, what a resolution. The threat just stops existing and everyone hugs it out. I'm sure there's some pre-New 52 story we should be remembering that makes it all make sense. Otherwise, someone in the here and now would have to put some effort into this.
They don't get into how they deal with Armstrong after the fallout of all this, because he knows their secret identities, something not given the kind of weight it really should. Or, for that matter, the colony soldiers, now that the whole operation is kaput. Maybe, like with other things in several epilogues, Tinian figured other writers would explain things for him later. Apparently he couldn't be bothered. The genius level of these teenage characters shifts as the plot demands, one outwitting the other, then the other getting the upper hand, then losing the upper hand, and it all becomes uninteresting like bad improv. All the holographic displays and making things happen with a computer, at no point did I believe that these were exceptionally intelligent characters.
The entire run is just more of the same, with some things made worse. He's still relying on telling over showing, convenient skills to try forcing the reader to be impressed, emotional manipulation, and not exploring far enough in some respects.
Clayface joining the team was dubious to begin with. After all the time he spent at odds with Gotham's capes and law enforcement, he conveniently wants to be better when Batman offers him an olive branch. His deteriorating moral compass feels overall inconsistent because he seemed pretty ruthless as soon as he got mutated. When captured by the Victim Syndicate, he was completely nerfed. His death was an excuse to make another character cry, and that's been made even more pointless now with the surprise revival at the end with no explanation. Because it's not about how he came back, it's about how you were supposed to feel, so who needs a coherent story? Maybe if his friendship with Cassino had any kind of foundation, his death would have been more than a lazy writer's ploy.
But I finally realized why I hate you. You're lazy.
The Victim Syndicate basically didn't go anywhere, never accomplishing anything, or stood for anything other than, see my pain, I was hurt, that means everyone was hurt, but focus on my pain. So much talk of the unintended consequences of Batman's war on crime, and we only see a bunch of superpowered losers led by the least interesting among them. Glory Griffin wasn't terrible, but befriending then turning on Basil while not irregular was just kind of there. Kind of worked for the story, but staying deformed to hurt Carlo makes very little sense. He already feels bad, and Gotham doesn't know he's been trying to do good, so staying Mudface literally only hurts her.
And what about the Underworld's reaction to Basil suddenly being a hero? Villains he's worked with. Did Tinian not see enough cry-hugging and Killer Croc finding out a fellow freak turned hero?
Or what about the reaction of Batman's closest law enforcement allies, like Jim Gordon? This run didn't make me want to read more about Batwing or Batwoman, and I'm pretty middle of the road about this retconned Azrael. The colony was a good idea, but claiming they were attacking John Paul to recruit him feels like a last-minute retcon not well supported by their first appearance. Which isn't the only example of that. It's never explained why Jacob suddenly decides he's okay with going with less lethal tactics, but I suppose we have to assume it was his daughter narrowly dying from the League of Shadows that did it. But this writer has yet to earn that kind of benefit of the doubt. Anarchy was boring. There's nothing interesting about him. Yes, surprising, I know. I mean, even he can hack and build advanced equipment like everyone else does. How is that not unique, right? Batman seems bipolar sometimes, cold and strict, then giving way to emotional outbursts. I know he's not the most stable guy around, but this doesn't feel like part of an arc, just him reacting to stuff around him as the writer wants it. He says he cares so much about Steph and Cassino and so forth, but it's never backed up in any way. Brother Eye gets brought up as something Bruce was working on, but his development never goes beyond that. Is he going to keep going, knowing what he knows now? Will he attempt to try and refine the AI somehow? How did he not take precautions against radiation? It feels like yet another element we should accept because it existed pre-Flashpoint, and Tinian doesn't have to do any actual development work in that area. It's basically his default setting for a lot, including his take on Stephanie Brown. Someone who's been crime fighting for a short time in this continuity, but is great at everything, chastises her peers for not thinking like her, endangers people without grasping the concept. How does this convince us that she knows or wants what's best for Gotham? Her mission for a city without Batman is laughable, short-sighted, and short-lived, and there are times where she's just outright dismissive when someone of her alleged convictions wouldn't hesitate to act, and never taken to task for it, or her mistakes. Suddenly she's spiteful, egocentric, unlikable, thinks of herself as superior to more experienced people, compliments herself based on very few valid victories, if any, and only appreciates those who blindly follow her.
Wait a minute. By Chuck Dixon's razor stubble, Tinian made her the new Harper Row! Was one bipedal dumpster fire of disease not enough for you, you maniac?
Then we arrive at the character he's done the worst to by far. Oh, Tinsley was confident enough in the artist he worked with to show crying and hugging and a few smiles here and there, brief moments that looked uplifting and positive, even if none of it was built up to or earned in the story proper. But when it came to Cassino, he couldn't really do it. Even in an issue focused mostly on her, he couldn't let the art tell the story about a mute character. He had to inject his pseudo-poetic narration to spoon-feed the reader. Instead of showing her or Clayface describe their pasts to each other, they just instantly become friends who know each other so well inside and out, and we just have to assume it's an informed bond, even though it's not. Tinian telling what should be shown is especially egregious when it comes to a character who's supposed to read body language. There's no struggle for Orphan to read Basil in his clay form, which would be interesting to see her overcome, but it's never addressed. It would have been more of an emotional narrative if she tried communicating to those around her how she's feeling, and them relating their perspective, so her choice to live with Leslie is something built up to, rather than a sappy surprise. But instead, Tinian thought the grounded way for this character was to just feel sad all the time until convoluted events led her to see the real Cassandra Cain in action, and then Cassino decides she's not required to be a bad person. This is not an arc, let alone an emotional one. It's a garbled mess from someone who doesn't understand the character or writing as well as he says he does.
Ever write a love letter to a crush? Tinian clearly wrote the letter and tried to marry and have kids with his love letter, because throughout his run he's shown more affection for his own basic writing than any of these characters.
I mean, confidence building can't replace real learning.
I read that Tinian claimed to have done some reading on neuroatypical minds, but either nothing stuck or it was more of a minute of skimming an article, because I don't believe he understands neurodivergence in the least. Not in the clunky baseline way he writes Cassino's dialogue, and certainly not in the complete nonsense that listening to Shakespeare plays lets her speak in full sentences and put in the contextual elements of an experienced actor. If you just like how sweet this scene looks, fine, like it for that. In terms of character, story building, or anything resembling realism, it's bullpucky. But that's how Tinian gets by, writing brief moments in stories that artists make look good, but doesn't make any sense in terms of the narrative or overall development.
I can't stand it any longer. This whole plant is insane! Insane, I tell you!
Tinian thought he was writing Orphan the same as Cassandra Cain when she first appeared. He may believe that, but it isn't true.
Let's look at everything he tossed away. An expressive character who communicated in her own way, meaning other characters had to adapt. She had a complicated relationship with a father that did care about her, mostly. She was undereducated but very intelligent, strong, determined, highly skilled but not perfect. She had shortcomings and struggles. She knew her skills and never confused the ability to harm or kill with the desire to do so. She was not afraid of her power or intimidated by her limited speech. She preferred her solitude much of the time, dedicated to the mission of fighting the evils in Gotham, even to a fault of being socially inexperienced. However, she would venture out in the world every so often. She forged friendships and bonds with characters that reached out to her, which didn't always begin amicably and would take time or someone else admitting to their own failing.
Much of this was shown to us with very little expository dialogue or narration, because, if you ask me, Kelly Puckett knows how to weave emotions into a story in an understandable way without spelling it out obviously. And he had some good artists to help him out in that regard.
Nerd!
Tinian can't accomplish this and probably won't learn because he frequently seems too impressed with his sense of poetry, which might get a C- from a substitute teacher that was sleep-deprived, overly generous, and drunk.
Now, what manner of character did Tinian replace Cass with? A timid, anxious girl whose face is hardly ever free of tears, raised by an idiot that hated her, whose name she took for stupid reasons, if any, afraid of her own abilities to the point of barely being competent, according to narration, who we have to be told is friends with rebooted versions of who the original cast was friends with before 2012, even though we hardly see them interact socially. A girl whose speech pattern changes by the writer's fancy with no regard to rational thought or logical storytelling, who cries over being alone, who everyone worries doesn't interact with people despite all the people she instantly makes friends with, some of them either being terrible or made so. Someone incapable of differentiating between an unwitting murder and a string of criminal activities that are suddenly not the criminal's fault for a lame attempt to make them appear the same. Someone who apparently has a handle on written language because she just does shut up, despite nothing leading up to or proving that. These are the choices Tinian made.
He chose poorly.
It seems like Tinsy wanted to make Cassandra Cain his way, but couldn't put in the effort a writer would to create a realized character. He just made a fan fiction copy of Cass, but made her weak because he thought he could make her strong. Made her sad because he thought he knew how to make her happy. Infantilized her because he thought he knew how to make her grow. Made her less because he thought he could make her more. And he was wrong on all counts.
Put them all together, it makes like 4 million mistakes.
Tinian does nothing, and I mean nothing interesting, unique, or necessary with his petty little clone. He doesn't really explore her thoughts or emotions, doesn't elaborate on anything that builds the character up. All he does is find ways to make her sad and alone because that's what he wants. Even when he kind of does, he's just doing a poorer job of what was already done right the first time. He thinks he's paying homage to the characters he grew up reading, when he really is showing an inability to grow them organically, relying on readers' memories of previous works to fill in gaps and mistake his stories for the canon he's trying to replace, but can't get by without.
That's just lazy writing.
This isn't Cassandra Cain. This is a heartless, barely recognizable replica he put half a thought into to toy around with like his own personal Cupid doll.
I've avoided calling James Tynion IV outright a bad writer, because, given how much of him I had read at the time, I was concerned that'd be hyperbolic. However, after this little trip, he's been mediocre most of the time, serviceable at his best, and that's rare, bewilderingly unrefined in various respects, and should not be writing any character he claims to love. So yeah, I can safely say, he's a bad writer.
He comes off as very self-indulgent despite his limited skill, expecting reader nostalgia and the works of predecessors to do most of the heavy lifting for him. He wants to inject his influence into events he had nothing to do with. I've found him to be lazy, overhyped, and incapable of doing anything more than surface-level observations of characters or their world, that he tries to pass off as much deeper and more insightful than they really are, along with his hackneyed poetry. He just states things happened without any foundation, whenever it's convenient for the story. He repeats himself, whether it's the basic story of Gotham under attack, a group out to get Batman, a teen tech genius that's smart until they're not, or saying that something is beyond someone else's imagination, something he said repeatedly but never lived up to the hype.
Lies on top of lies on top of lies.
Or Casino constantly going after human traffickers. I don't know if there was some deeper meaning behind that, but I kind of doubt it, because again, he's very redundant. He's terrible with secret identities, with the team barely making an effort to hide them, never addressing the dangers of their enemies finding out. It's like he's not even trying. Time after time, characters just conveniently know things or understand in a way that feels artificial and contrived. They say they care about each other, but hardly ever show it. There are contradictions that are never addressed or fixed, which is a fault of the writer and the editors. It's dumb writing pretending to be smart. It fails to be engaging. He can't seem to choose between making characters new to heroism or experience, so he flip-flops between the two. Frankly, I feel lied to. Lied to by some people who suggested these heroes and heroines I once enjoyed were written just the same as before. Lied to by Tynion, who said he loved them and got their emotional cores just right. Lied to by anyone at DC who said they cared about Cassandra, Steph, or Tim. There is nothing special about James Tynion IV's writing, except in how he screws up good characters crafted by better writers, in how he just completely misses the mark and replaces something good with a terrible replication like a Disney live-action remake. It's almost impressive how the perfect storm of incompetent higher-ups, a willingness to work for cheap, and a little bit of nepotism can be so beneficial to someone of such mediocre ability.
127 comics with this guy's name on it, his input, and he's managed to achieve the heights of not that bad when writing characters I don't care about. He's had more than enough chances to be more than a fanfiction writer that got lucky in ways he shouldn't have. And he couldn't do it. I'm the Angry Spork, and I'm done with this mess. letter from DC. It's just a couple of pages of signatures from like middle school or something, because I didn't want to spring for a yearbook, because I hated that place.